Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for hanging out with us here on a daily racing form podcast. We're going to talk special wagers for the Breeders' Cup. I'm Gino Buccola along with David Aragona. David, the wagering menu each and every year just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like the Breeders' Cup event itself. We're all the way up to 14 races now. We have multiple day wagers. We have doubles, pick threes, everything. You picked out a couple pretty interesting wagers that you and I can dive into.
Yeah, you want to have a lot of options as a bettor diving into this Breeders' Cup card because your opinions or your strong opinions can be scattered throughout the day. And some of these special wagers allow you to link up races that maybe are not consecutive or are not on the same Breeders' Cup day. They've got these three special wagered 2-day doubles. We're going to focus primarily on the Juvenile-Classic double. I think both are really interesting races to discuss individually. And if you got opinions in each of those, you can link them up. I think there's also a Juvenile Phillies Distaff double and a Juvenile turf double that we can touch on briefly. And then I think we're going to finish up with the 50-cent all turf pick 4, which links up all 4 of the Breeders' Cup turf races contested over turf on the Saturday card.
And what you were pointing out, I think, is really helpful to bettors because there have been a lot of nights, David, where I've been up late at night going in my head over the race order on a particular card and just wondering, like, if those races were in a different order, if the stronger opinions I had, I could have parlayed them better, or if they were the races that I were in the pick 3, I would have scored. And you're just running it through your head. Why couldn't that race have been there and that race have been there? This gives us the opportunity to really focus on the strongest opinions that we have and try to make the most out of it.
Yeah, most horse players are not disciplined enough to do a manual parlay. So having these special wagers available kind of locks in those opinions after the first leg. And I think it's a great opportunity. And I mean, we've discussed at least the Classic together. I know we did a video about that. You can check out on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel. But I mean, these are the kinds of races where there's so much to dive into. A lot of just interesting talking points throughout all of the 14 Breeders' Cup races. And we're going to try to zoom through as many opinions as we can get to on this podcast.
Okay, so we'll start with the Juvenile, which is going to be on Friday. We could talk about the Juvenile-Classic double. Remember, if you want to follow along with us, we'll be looking at race number 7 on Friday at Del Mar, and you can get the Breeders' Cup past performances, packages, clocker reports for 2 days. And David, I think you're doing the betting strategies again this year, right? For Friday and for Saturday?
That's right. Brad, Free, and I are writing betting strategies for Friday and Saturday. That is full card picks from both of us, written analysis for every single race, including the undercard races of the Breeders' Cup. Brad and I are going to go back and forth discussing some of our opinions and also putting some wagers out there, including some multi-race wagers that we're going to put together.
I think I said race number 7. The 9th on Friday is the Juvenile. The 7th is the Juvenile Phillies. We may be able to hit on that later. But for this double, let's go race 9, Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Then we'll get into the Classic, which is going to be race 8 on Saturday. So in the Juvenile, what's such a fun race to discuss is we used to think about the future. We think about these horses that we could possibly be seeing in the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness and the Belmont and those big races next year. And I think we have a good group that lined up for this race, David. You have East Avenue and Chancellor McPatrick, 2 horses who are polar opposites as far as their running styles are concerned. On the inside, East Avenue, very, very fast, wants to go to the front end. And on the outside, Chancellor McPatrick could not be more opposite. He is not fast early, gets outrun a little bit, and then comes flying late. And then we have a couple others that are really nice. You have a horse like Jonathan's Way, who was sort of the king of the Midwest. You have a couple Bob Baffert runners in here, as would be expected in any major juvenile race. So I thought all of the major players really showed up in this race.
For sure. I mean, you mentioned those 2 major players who could be vying for favoritism, East Avenue and Chancellor McPatrick. I mean, one is post 1, the other is post 10, and those could be their positions early in the race as well, as long as East Avenue breaks well, given their very different running styles. But it does feel like the pace scenario of this Juvenile could really affect the outcome. And I'll show the Timeform US pace projector for this race because I think it's interesting to talk about. East Avenue, I mean, he's the horse that kind of has shown that he's done his best running when he's got this clear lead, really unchallenged on the front end, and he's able to attain that position because he's just so naturally fast. I do wonder what's going to happen with speed drawn outside of him here. Obviously, Jonathan's Way has tactical speed. We saw him show it last time in the Iroquois, and he's the number 5 horse. It's actually shown just ahead of East Avenue on the pace projector. We'll see if they ride him that way, but I'm most intrigued to see what Bob Baffert does with the 3 runners that he has entered in here, because Bob usually tries to split up the running styles when he's got multiple entrants, as any trainer would do in this situation. And I'm kind of interested to see which one gets the most aggressive ride. I kind of figure it could be the number 2 getaway car, since he's drawn right outside of East Avenue. And if he's able to cross over in front of that one heading into the clubhouse turn, it probably increases the winning chances of everybody, including Bob Baffert's other 2 horses.
And I think he kind of feels like the horse who probably needs that trip the most. I feel like Gaming and Citizen Bull, if we were to see them sit off the pace and win this race, or sit off the pace and run well, that wouldn't surprise me as much. I probably would be a little surprised if Getaway Car had that kind of trip where he was like mid-pack and close. So I think that will be the one of the Bafferts that they do get really aggressive with. And as you pointed out, right outside of East Avenue. So just those 2, and then the possibility of another Baffert runner. We have no idea what we can really expect tactically from the horses coming from Japan either. So I think when you have a point that you've made many times, when it looks like there might only be 2 speeds in a race, then sometimes one of them can sneak away. When you're getting to there might be 3 or 4, maybe could even be 5. That's when you feel a little bit more confident that the pace will be very, very honest. And I'm looking for horses that are going to be sitting off or coming from the back of the pack in here.
Yeah, and one thing with those 2 Japanese horses, I think this is a tough spot for both of them. Shin Believe, I think, is a horse that has some talent. I couldn't quite pull the trigger on him because it's his 2nd career start ever in the Breeders' Cup, coming off just a maiden victory. But it should be noted, these are also 2 horses going out for the same trainer. And while Shin Believe was more of a stalker in his race in Japan, Akara Wazelle, who I don't think has much of a chance to win, he did show the speed to set the pace in a 6-furlong race on debut, then showed an opposite running style in his next start. So you almost wonder if those 2 are also going to play a little bit of team tactics. We'll see what happens with this field. But getting into our opinions, I landed on Chancellor McPatrick. It's interesting. I've kind of been seeing some other handicappers' picks come in, being a daily racing form guy. I get to see who a lot of my colleagues pick. And I'm kind of struck by the fact that a lot of people seem to be downgrading this horse, which says to me that maybe we're going to see a greater disparity in the odds from the 5-2 on East Avenue to the 3-1 on Chancellor McPatrick. I think we're going to see maybe East Avenue go off closer to 2-1, and Chancellor McPatrick could be somewhere in the 7-2, 4-1 range, if not a little higher than that. And I guess you could make the argument that he's got to answer the 2-turn question, and he's closed so well sprinting or going 1 turn that maybe that's just the kind of horse he is. Personally, I'm not too worried about distance with this horse. He just seems to have this style where he wants to take himself out of races early, even when he breaks more sharply.
Because he was quicker last time, right? Like he didn't. And we had this conversation before. The first 2 races he had, you could maybe make excuses and say, yeah, you know what? He hit the gate, one of them. The other time, he just wasn't out of the gate quite as quickly. But this time, he had a fine start, and then he just sort of got outrun after, or he just sort of wants to go back, watch the race develop in front of him, and that's the way he's able to really take it all in. Because like right here, this is not a bad start.
No, he's breaking from the outside post there, that number 10. And he actually, he stumbled forward a little bit, but he was right in line with the other horses, then just immediately takes himself out of the race. And Flavien Prat kind of knows him by now and just lets him do it. But you could see halfway through this Champagne, he also kind of knows when it's time to move. And all on his own, without even really being asked, he just gets into position to strike at the top of the stretch and goes away from this field at the end. I'm not too worried about distance. He's got plenty of stamina breeding. It seems like these McKinseys that we've seen so far just keep getting better with added distance. He's got this big, long stride on him. I think a 1:16 is going to be just fine. And some may say that the Del Mar surface won't favor him as well as the New York tracks, because Del Mar can be a little speed favoring at times. But with the amount of speed in this race, I don't see it as being some merry-go-round affair. So I think Chancellor McPatrick is the horse to beat here. And I'm thrilled that it's not looking like he's going to be favored.
Yeah, and I think the way that you and I are going to play this double, and we're going to look at it, is we're going to look at kind of like that next tier of horses below East Avenue and hope that if East Avenue takes a little bit of money, we're looking at the horses that will take advantage of a pace meltdown that we're handicapping and that we're envisioning in here. That's why I agree with you in that I would not be taking a stand against Chancellor McPatrick in this particular race. Even if you don't think he's a Kentucky Derby winner down the line or a horse next year that's going to continue to progress, this race just shapes up really well for him. Like, he should be passing so many other horses, even if he doesn't win this race. It just feels like it's going to be really, really fast early, and he's the most proven of all of these horses coming from behind.
Yeah, that's how I'm feeling. We'll see how some of these races play out from a betting standpoint, but I personally believe he's the most likely winner of this race. I trust him more to show up on the day than I do East Avenue, who, like I said, I mean, he's got a lot of talent, but the thing we don't know about East Avenue is, can he fend off a challenge? Because he's kind of never really seen another horse in the races he's been in. He just gets right to the front end and is able to just strut around the track as the boss from there. We'll see if that's going to be the trip that he gets on Friday. But a horse trying to face that potential adversity for the first time, I didn't want to take a short price on. Gino, I know you like a couple of other horses, so I'll let you highlight that.
Yeah, one of the horses that I think could offer us some nice value is a horse who was actually behind East Avenue last time out, and that was Ferocious. Ferocious was extremely impressive winning the debut, which was on and off track. That was back in August. Following that, his Hopeful was a really strange race because he was not traveling all that well in the Hopeful. At the top of the lane, he almost looked like he was backing up and probably going to finish 4th or 5th in that race. And Chancellor McPatrick made his huge sweeping move, and it sort of like kicked Ferocious into another gear. I don't think he was ever going to beat Chancellor McPatrick, but I was just impressed the fact that he kind of went on with him and tried hard to go on with him. And then in the most recent race, Ferocious might have run his race before it even started because he was banging around in the starting gate. He just did not seem very comfortable. And he was fine. He was second. He was well beaten that day. But it was a race where East Avenue won and was a lone speed winner. I just would not be shocked to see both the 4 and the 5, you mentioned Jonathan's Way, get the trip where they have tactical speed, they have positional speed. They can be sitting 4th, 5th, behind that group of horses that's battling for the lead. They can possibly get the jump on Chancellor McPatrick, and they can offer us more value than either of the favorites and maybe get better trips than both of them. That's how when I'm looking for value in a race, it's, can these horses get a better trip? Can there be a reason? What's their advantage for why I would lean towards them versus playing Chancellor McPatrick, who I agree with you is probably the most likely winner of this race. I would include Ferocious and Jonathan's Way and exotics. I really like the debut from Jonathan's Way, showing that he could come from off the pace if he needed. They put him on the front end. A lot of times when you just think you have the best horse, that's how you want to ride them. But I'm hoping Jonathan's Way, David, is sitting off the pace in here. I don't want him to be lining up on the lead and battling with East Avenue.
Yeah, and I kind of agree that the connections are probably going to be looking to slot him in behind those horses that we expect to go forward from the inside, even though he showed that versatility to go to the front end of the Iroquois. I think the positive takeaway from that race was that he just learned from that debut experience and could run a much more professional race. Yep. From his gait habits to the way he handled himself during the race in the Iroquois. You like to see that mental progression from one start to the next. So he doesn't strike me as a horse that needs to be in front to run his best race. He certainly displayed that on debut. Getting back to Ferocious, I thought long and hard about putting him on top in this race. They ultimately put him second behind Chancellor McPatrick. For me, it would be all about price with Ferocious. If he is indeed somewhere in the 6-1 range, 6-1 to 8-1 range, I think that's very fair on him. The talent that he showed on debut, I believe, is still there. As you said, he just looked like the Hopeful was a learning experience for him. And the Breeders' Futurity, I don't know how much the trouble into the clubhouse turn really affected him because he did get bounced around quite a bit. And for a big, long, striding horse like him, I think that kind of breaks the rhythm a little bit. And he doesn't appear to be quite as agile as a horse like, let's say, Jonathan's Way, who can get right back into the race after getting bumped around like that. So I think that did affect him. But I like the way that he was still maintaining his strides across the wire. He's this horse that I personally don't worry about distance too much because his mechanics and the way that he moves, I mean, he's got such a long stride and he's got by far the slowest stride cadence of any horse in this race. He just lumbers along and lopes with each step. So horses like that typically want every bit of distance they can get. We'll see if that's the case, but I agree. He's a major player in this race.
So it looks like for me, when I was handicapping this race, I had a tougher time finding any big, massive prices that I thought were win candidates in here. I thought the best way from a value-based standpoint to play this race was maybe to try to beat East Avenue and then look for that next tier of horses who could be maybe double the price that he is. If he is in like the 2-1 range and, you know, Ferocious, Jonathan's Way, and Chancellor McPatrick might all be 4-1 plus.
That's how I saw it as well. We sorted them in a slightly different order. I think we'll get to that at the end of handicapping the Classic. But I think we saw the same horses in this race. I couldn't quite warm up to any of the Baffer trio. I'm a little bit afraid of Citizen Bowl because he appears to be trading out of his skin coming into this race. But he hasn't done enough in the afternoons to warrant me supporting him in this spot.
So Friday, race number 9 is the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Shall we turn the page to the Classic now, David, for Saturday, the second part of this Juvenile-Classic double? So as David was pointing out, a couple of these doubles that tie races together, a couple of them that are 2 days. And then we're going to get into the all-turf pick 4 following this one. But the main event for Saturday is the Breeders' Cup Classic. How do you like the change that they made, putting the Classic in the middle of the day, race number 8? So it's the end of the early pick 5. It starts the late pick 5. It's the middle of a lot of the exotics, and it's a one race that you really want to be right about on Saturday.
I personally don't mind it too much. This Classic came up so strong that it would be the feature race no matter where they put it on the card. I mean, I think there's so much anticipation built up for this Classic with the international participation, City of Troy being such a polarizing option in this race, and the 3-year-old stepping up against older horses on the American side, the Japanese. There's just so much to discuss in the Classic that whether it's race 8 or race 12 or race 1, I'm just looking forward to seeing how it plays out.
And for all of you out there that want a little more analysis on that, David and I actually did a full horse-by-horse preview of the Classic on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel that you can check out. But for this, we'll talk a little bit more about wagering and how we're going to bet on this particular race and try to close out our double, because hopefully at this point we've gotten Chancellor McPatrick, or maybe like a 6 or 7 to 1 Ferocious. That would be a nice price to get our double started off. And we get into this Classic with 11 grade 1 winners. David, in the conversations you and I have had over the last couple months, it seems like we've not always been that high on Fierceness, a horse who I think is brilliant on his best days. And if we're talking about horses with the highest ceilings, I would love it if Fierceness and Forever Young and City of Troy like all took to the surface and were able to show up with a good effort, because I think all 3 of them have just incredibly high ceilings and are capable of really, really big races. But in this kind of a big field with a lot of variables, I worry about Fierceness a little more than some of the others that I just think are more adaptable than him. I respect his ability now. He showed us he can get a 1.25 miles. He showed us he can put back-to-back big races together, but he still hasn't really had to overcome a whole lot in his races. And I feel like in this big field, he may have to.
Yeah, and there are so many different opinions out there about why Fierceness hasn't shown up in the races that he's disappointed in. And I have a slightly different take on it than I think a lot of people do. I know there's this every other pattern that some people espouse. There's the adversity idea that if he gets bumped by another horse, he's not going to run. I personally think that it has a lot to do with pace. And you can kind of see it when you look at his Timeform US past performances here. The 2 races that he ran as a 3-year-old that were real pace outliers for him were the Holy Bull, where even John Velasquez has said the slow pace almost kind of turned him off, and he just never really got in gear that day, and he wasn't able to quicken with those horses. And then, of course, the Kentucky Derby, which you can see here, is the only race on his card that has those red color-coded Timeform US pace figures. And when you're using the Timeform US pace and speed figures, you kind of want to take note of the final time number in his most recent race, the Travers. That would be a 1:31. It kind of as a translation of the buyer speed figure to the Timeform US scale, just based on the final time. And then see how all of the pace figures compare to that final time. And if they're right in line, that's kind of the easiest trip for a forwardly placed runner. And you can see in the Travers, all of his pace figures are kind of within about 2 to 3 points of that final time. So he ran a very even pace every step of the way. In the races where he hasn't gotten to do that, the Holy Bull I mentioned, where he also had some trouble at the start, and especially the Kentucky Derby, who was kind of taken out of that rhythm to be pushed to run a little faster than what's in his comfort zone early in the race, he just completely shut down. There are also some, ideas from the connections that his weight wasn't great coming into that race, or he needs more time between races. We'll see what the truth is when he performs on Saturday, but I think the pace has a lot to do with it. And as we take a look at the Timeform US pace projector for this race, I don't see Fierceness getting into that comfortable rhythm with the speed that's drawn in here, particularly in the form of the number 12 Arthur's Ride, who is drawn outside of Fierceness and seems like he's committed to going to the front. And if Arthur's Ride is going to be sending from post 12, I think the pace is going to be legit.
And then a couple other horses who aren't nearly as fast naturally, but they get drawn way to the outside too. Like horses like Newgate and Next, they don't really have a chance from way out there unless they make a decision. Like one way or the other, are you going to grab a hold and take back and try to come from off the pace? Or are you going to try to get your position, which could make things have to be even quicker than possible? A horse like Forever Young has some versatility. I don't think he'll be on the lead or anything like that, but he draws the inside, may need to secure some position. Just a huge field with a couple really fast horses, and then some other classy horses, heady riders who are going to try to take position. I just feel like it is going to be a very fair and honest pace in here, and one that I'm looking for horses that I think, just like I actually, just similar to what I said in the juvenile, looking for more horses that are going to be in that tracking spot or the closers in here.
Yeah, and I think we should probably discuss City of Troy, because I know we have a slight difference of opinion on him, maybe a bigger than slight difference of opinion. For me, City of Troy is kind of the reason to play this race, because I want no part of him whatsoever. If he handles the dirt and runs his best turf race on the main track, I guess he's got a chance to win here. I don't even think it's a given that he's going to win in that situation. But I just think that there's so much uncertainty about whether or not he's going to handle this surface that I can't see taking any kind of short price on him. He's 5-2 on the morning line. I personally think he's going to be higher than that.
Yeah, I agree.
I just don't see the American support for this horse coming through in that way from a
I think you said
standpoint.
Would it be surprising to see like it even out between him and Forever Young? Like just the odds different or flipped even?
I did kind of go through the process setting my own line for this race. I have Forever Young 7-2 and both City of Troy and Fierceness 4-1. That's I'm viewing those three as being very close in price. And I kind of think there's a chance Forever Young could be the slight favorite. But even at 4-1, I don't see City of Troy as being worth that gamble. For me, Justify is a sire that produces horses that are really dependent on what the dam's tendencies are. So City of Troy is from a female family that is just 100% turf. And we've seen Justify get turf horses when he's bred to turf dams. And watching him train this week, watching his races, he's got that high stepping action, like a little gazelle out there. I mean, he just moves so much more like a turf horse than a dirt horse. And I get why they've got to try this, because of the potential stud value if he handles the dirt. And this has been like the 2-decade-long dream of Coolmore to get one of these top European turf stars to win on the dirt in the Classic. So I understand this is their quest, but I just don't see City of Troy as being the one that comes through for them. So he's not a horse I'm using at all.
And let me say, I think we're going to have him, I think, on our double, but from a betting a horse to win and a gambling standpoint, I don't think I'd ever bet this horse to win. I put him in the mix and in the exotics. He's the type of horse who I would use in tries, especially if I had an exactas and stuff like that, especially if I had a strong opinion on one or two other horses in the race, and a horse that I want to have in some of my multis that I like in the other races. So like, I don't want him to be the reason why I get knocked out of a pick 4 or a pick 5 if I've scored on some of my other strong opinions, but I would never go to the window and bet my $20 to win on this horse. And I think it's going to be a much shorter than what he should be odds to win this race. I think some of it has to do with there just not being what I envision as a superstar in here of a lot of the American runners. Like Fierceness is capable of really big on his best day. I think a lot of the other horses in here are really solid, really competitive, really contentious. That's why it's a great betting race. But you were pointing out there's no like flight line or superstar that I'm really scared of. That City of Troy, I thought if he weren't to take to the surface from his class, he would be right in the mix with these. So I hate doing like a defensive thing as a gambler, because that's one of the things you shouldn't do. When people say, oh, I'm going to throw in this favorite defensively, you really shouldn't do that. This is probably one of the more unique situations for me individually, just because there's such a variable in not knowing. And on a Breeders' Cup day, I will have 10, 12 to 1 shots in the races around him leading up. So I just didn't want to let him be the one to beat me. But I wouldn't even have had a problem if we would have, like, anyone that's watching this takes a stand against him on win end and things like that, and looks at Forever Young, who I like a little bit more. Some of the horses that you like, talk about a big price, David, that I'll give you credit for. You had this one last time, and Highland Falls was super impressive. It was like you spelled it out perfectly. You were waiting for that big effort from him, and a little bit of a change in tactics from Pratt, just getting aggressive with the horse. He responded.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm not supposed to go back to this horse because I got paid a very generous $16 last time, and he definitely delivered against what is a weaker field than the one he's facing on Saturday in the Classic. But as you were noting, I've always felt like the potential was there with this horse, and he just feels like one that took a while to learn his lessons, and also it took a while for the connections to sort of learn how he needed to be ridden.
While
Because
never really running poorly. So, right?
no,
As he's learning, he's still in the mix all the time, but he's just not quite putting it all together.
Like, I think that they finally realized that taking him as far off the pace as they could was not the answer in that Monmouth Cup, where, I mean, I won't pull up the replay, but he was forward heading into the clubhouse turn, and it seemed like Giroux was almost under the notion or the instructions to just get this horse off the pace at all costs, and he dragged him behind runners and kind of got himself in trouble and basically put himself in a situation where he couldn't win from there. Might have beaten Tapit Trice that day if he had just gone forward out of the gate. Got the switch to Flavien Prat last time, and they clearly had it in their heads correctly that the only way to beat Arthur's Ride was to go after Arthur's Ride on the front end. And Highland Falls not only showed that he had the tactical speed to stay with that horse early, but also had the superior stamina to pull away from him late. So I thought that was an excellent effort in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. The 104 buyer, he might have to improve upon a little bit to beat this field. But, I mean, there are only so many horses that have run faster than him, one of which is Fierceness, who either you trust him or you don't. If you don't trust that he's going to run the 111 buyer back, then suddenly the number that a horse has to reach to win this race gets about 5 points lower. So I think that puts
Another
Highland
one is
Falls.
Arthur's Ride, too.
Yep.
Same sort of thing, right? Like, that's the if they're not getting that trip that they need where they're comfortable on the front end, they're probably not going to throw up a 110, a 111, because they're going to have to work a little bit harder. So I completely agree with you in that those horses with some of those bigger figures, I don't know if those need to be your gauge. Like, a horse has to run a 110 in order to win this race. I don't think that you should necessarily handicap this race that way.
100%. And with Highland Falls, I know that some people might make something of the fact that Flavien Prat chose Sierra Leone over this horse. I kind of get it. I mean, he's been with Sierra Leone for longer. He's got a relationship with both Chad Brown and Brad Cox. Sierra Leone, in a way, I guess, is the more reliable horse, and he's going to be a shorter price in this race. So it always makes sense to take them out of the horse that's going to be the shorter price. Speaking of price, I don't think Highland Falls is going to be 20-1. He'll probably be 10-1. But even that, for me, is value on him if he runs as well as I think he will, getting a more aggressive ride than I think he would have gotten prior to showing what he could do in that Jockey Club Gold Cup. And Gino, I brought up Sierra Leone.
You just teased him. It's almost like you've done this before, David. Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, he's a horse that I think you need to have an opinion about. I mean, maybe he's not quite as polarizing as Fierceness, because I think the general consensus is that he's going to run pretty well in this race. Whether he runs well enough to win definitely is a polarizing topic, because I know some people believe that he's just this horse that never wins. When you look at his PPs here, I don't know if that's exactly true, because he runs well every time, and he's won three of eight starts. Yes, he's disappointed at short prices a few times recently, but I can make some minor excuses, especially when it comes to the pace. And I think he's been mentally maturing a little bit, kind of under the radar, getting more professional over his last several races. I think he's a major player in this spot.
I completely agree. And a lot of your analysis of Fierceness, why this might not be the best race for him, and how Fierceness was able to really look impressive in some of those particular races in those pace scenarios. I think the very opposite can be said for Sierra Leone in those races that he loses to Fierceness in those smaller fields where the pace is much more to the liking of Fierceness. Even when he looms up, like, that's the problem. He looms up and he gets into contention, and then everyone just assumes he's supposed to run on by. Like, he didn't have to exert a lot of energy just to get there. In this bigger field, it should shape up well for him. Again, when you look at his past performances, it feels different than the conversation about him that you were kind of hitting on. Like, he's improved in every race on the buyer's speed figure scale. He keeps getting a little bit better. He's never even been beaten 2 lengths in any race in his career. And I feel like in this field of 14, there's going to be at least 8 or 9 horses that are backing up and that he's going to be passing, even if he doesn't really run a great race, because just the way the running style is in this one, I feel like it would be a very fun narrative for a horse who's been the bridesmaid in a lot of the bigger races to come back in the Breeders' Cup Classic and put it all together. And I always love little stories like that might be able to play out on Saturday. So at one of the better prices you're going to get on Sierra Leone and you've ever had on Sierra Leone, I think he's a major player and one you have to use in any like any type of horizontal wager. Like I think if you're playing any type of exacta tri-super, we know the way he is. If you're playing multis, then I like him too. I really do think he can win this race.
Yeah, and another one. I mean, I don't want to keep criticizing morning lines. Believe me, I know it's not an easy job, and the best compliment you can have as a morning line maker is when nobody's talking about.
Nobody says a word.
It's kind of unavoidable in a race like the Breeders' Cup, where it's hard to put together and everyone's going to have different opinions. If I'm right that the favorites are not going to be as low as 5-2 and 3-1, I think it's going to bring down the prices on horses like Sierra Leone and Forever Young. So I expect. He's not going to be vying for favoritism. I think he's going to be probably more 6-1 to 8-1 range. But for a horse that's as reliable as he is, I don't think that's a bad price on him. I agree with everything you're saying. And, speaking of the horse that he was in the photo with in the Kentucky Derby, I know we're both big fans of Forever Young. I mean, you put him a little higher in your picks than I did, but I mean, I think he's another one that you just have to respect in this race.
Yeah, I mean, his only loss was in the Derby when he had trouble, when Sierra Leone was leaning in on him and bumping him, and he probably was best in the Kentucky Derby that day, honestly, in his first start in the U.S., and I love the fact that he has a race now in the U.S. to get acclimated. I was talking to somebody who was pointing this out, and I wish I could remember and give them credit for it, but I really just like the thought of a lot of these Japanese horses will probably take a race or two just to get acclimated to the style. We see that racing styles in different countries are different. They run quicker earlier in other places. They run slower earlier, and then it's a sprint later. You have to get used to it a little bit. I'm thinking about a horse like last year, like Ushba Tesoro in the Breeders' Cup Classic, who just kind of got outrun a little bit in that race and was pretty impressive the way he closed, but he just got distanced a bit in that field. I feel like when we see these Japanese runners make their second and third starts in the U.S., they might be a lot better acclimated to the way these races will shape up. And a horse like Forever Young, I think I'm with you. Like, I would not be shocked if he's favored in this race at all. He just has a lot of buzz. He has a lot of fans, and he's coming into this race exactly how you would want. He had his time off. He got the first race back off the bench. That was a nice, easy race for him to shake some of the rust off. And now he's got the big goal at hand.
Yeah, and the last race in Japan, for anybody who hasn't seen it, it was a perfect prep because while he was beating weaker 3-year-olds, it was a 15-horse field, and he drew the rail, just like he's drawn on Saturday. And he stumbled a bit, had to take brief kickback, and then got to the outside. I think we can stop with this notion of this horse not liking kickback. He ran just fine with a lot of kickback in the Kentucky Derby, so let's kill that conversation. Gino, I've just seen everybody, if not picking this horse on top, respecting this horse. This horse seems to have universal respect coming into this race, which is not the case for City of Troy or Fierceness. I just feel like that kind of horse is the favorite. So, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be the favorite. I think he's the most likely winner of this race. He's definitely a horse I'm using.
So from a doubles gambling standpoint, where we talked about Forever Young, mentioned City of Troy to start with, threw in the price of Sierra Leone, and then your top selection, Highland Falls. So we're going to put a double together from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile on Friday to the Breeders' Cup Classic on Saturday, using those horses that we just mentioned. And then we'll take a swing against East Avenue in the Juvenile. Hopefully we can get a little value there. And then we'll have opportunities, in particular with Highland Falls, who you like, and with Sierra Leone as horses that could pay very, very well if we were to connect on this double.
Yeah, having done a lot of these podcasts, especially with my old podcast partner, Craig, the feedback we always get is, you guys talk too long. We just want the summary of who you like. So
exactly.
Here are the numbers for everyone who wants to fast forward a half hour into this video.
Picks.
Yeah. And displaying it this way, it's not suggesting that either Gino or I are going to play this double exactly this way. I mean, this is just kind of a base value outlining all of the numbers that we really highlighted, and kind of combining our opinions. Personally, for me, I would want to play this double getting alive specifically to Highland Falls and Sierra Leone in the Classic. I think we both have the idea to play against East Avenue in the Juvenile, and that's kind of where we're extracting some value from this double. I'm personally leaving out City of Troy. I get where Gino's coming from, though, using him defensively. I think defensively is the right adverb to use for this horse because he is kind of an all or nothing type. I mean, I am a little bit afraid that I could be wrong about him because I think if he does show that talent on the dirt, he can certainly win. It's just not something I'm personally gambling on.
And you can find, David, you'll find horses between 5-2 and 5-1 that you like a lot better than him any day of the week. You know, it won't really bother you getting beat by a horse that you didn't love that much at that short of a price. And I think when you're playing doubles, I generally shorten up in a double versus like a pick 4 or a pick 5, you know, with a 50-cent base wager. You can use a few extra horses. Doesn't cost you quite as much. You can still get a solid return on an investment. If I were going to hammer this thing, I would probably play 4, 5, 10 with 111 myself on mine. I'd probably use Forever Young and Sierra Leone as like the two that I would key in on this double. And then I would use our same 3 in the Juvenile there on Friday.
Yeah, I think we're very similar in that sense, maybe subbing in one horse for another, but structure-wise, I think we're on a similar page.
Because that's the one thing we can always do right. We're not going to always pick the right horses. There are going to be days where my opinion is just wrong. I can always make the correct wagers or try to make the correct wagers or as close to the correct wagers to give myself the best opportunity. That's the one thing as gamblers we can always do. So I'm going to try to do that as often as I can.
100%. I think if you're guiding people in the right direction on how to wager, we're halfway there. The picking is only half of the equation. With that, I think we can move on to the next sequence from these special wager category that we're really going to take a deep dive into, and that is the all-turf pick 4 on Saturday.
So we get 4 Breeders' Cup turf races on Saturday. There are 9 Breeders' Cup races on Saturday. For the purpose of this conversation, we're going to talk about the 4 of them that are on the grass. So, David, we get started. Is it race number 5, right, in the turf sprint? Where we have our
with the turf sprint,
our first leg. So what's also always fascinating about the Breeders' Cup turf sprint too is that no 2 turf courses are really identical as far as distance, as far as shape. We'll see some horses in here who have run 6.5 at Kentucky Downs, which is much different than 5 furlongs at Del Mar, or different than 6.5 down the hill at Santa Anita, or different than 6 furlongs at Aqueduct. So we don't have one type of course or distance that all of these courses are coming out of. And I think that's what makes the turf sprint fun, a little bit unique each year. And we have a 5 furlong turf sprint here that we have to start with Cogburn, who has been brilliant. I mean, use any adjective you want, David, right, to describe him this year.
100%. I mean, he just has blazing early speed. We saw that in the Jaipur when he just laid down ridiculous fractions. And unlike most horses who go that fast, he kept up the pace and set I think we can call it a world record of 59-4 for 5.5 furlongs. I didn't know horses were capable of going sub 1 minute for 5.5. He did it over a very hard summer turf course at Saratoga. But I mean, it was just an effort that I think was the finest sprint performance that we've seen anywhere this year, regardless of surface. Just the speed that he showed is going to translate very well, I think, to the 5 furlongs that he's going to get at Del Mar, because as you were kind of alluding to, we've seen many iterations of this turf sprint, some down the hill at Santa Anita, some 5.5 over courses where you can close a little bit better, like at Keeneland. These Del Mar turf sprints typically play more to speed. In the 5 furlong Breeders' Cup race that we've seen speed be very dangerous, and Cogburn possesses that early speed, and he's also a great gate horse. So I think you can rely on him to break sharply and establish his position. And if he does, he's going to be really tough for this field to beat.
And he doesn't need the lead, but why mess around when you're a horse like him who gets such a good beginning and already has that advantage? They just have gone on with it this year. He's not a horse who's fast and then slow late. He finishes. He absolutely finishes. That's why he's so hard to take shots against. I've had many conversations with you over the last few months, many races that we preview. More times than not, you're going to see the both of us taking swings against favorites. And this is just one of those that's so hard to do so, to have a real legitimate reason why you're trying to toss him, other than just, yeah, he's going to be a short price. I hope something weird happens. Like, from how I'm looking at races and what reasons I would try to beat horses. I just can't come up with them for him.
Yeah, I went through the process of trying to make about 3 different horses my pick in this race, but in doing so, I kind of had to envision the trip that was going to not only work for that horse, but also get Cogburn beat. And I could never quite check both of those boxes to have confidence in another horse to make them the value play in this race. And I mean, I didn't chalk out in too many of these Breeders' Cup races. For those that look at all of my picks through the 14 races, this is one where I personally could not see past Cogburn.
And I'm a little bit worried myself because I thought the only horse that personally could compete with Cogburn in this race was the horse who's drawn way to the outside. And I don't really know, like, when you're trying to beat a horse like Cogburn as a gambler, you generally want very nice value. So for me, I don't think I'm going to go bet Bradsell to win if he's 3-1 or 4-1, because that's not the type of value I really want on a horse against Cogburn. I just respect the heck out of this horse. Overall, his body of work is fantastic. Just what type of trip is he going to have to overcome from out there? I feel like if Cogburn wasn't in this race, he's the horse to beat. But from a gambling standpoint, you know, maybe like if you're looking for one other horse to use, if you have strong opinions, I still respect the heck out of him. But I do get concerned, David, and just, if you're looking for that one horse, I probably would want a horse that's going to be twice as high as Bradsell against Cogburn for their actual chances of winning the race.
Yeah, and this is not a criticism of the morning line, because unfortunately the Breeders' Cup needs these morning lines before the post draw. I think anybody would made this horse a higher price if they knew.
Wait, 6-1 maybe?
12. I think he's going to be closer to 6-1, and that's maybe not a terrible price on a really talented horse. My problem with him is twofold, Gino. When you watch his races in Europe, he is a horse that likes to race prominently up towards the front end. I'm a little concerned he's going to get run off his feet early by Cogburn and maybe some other speeds to his inside. And also, he just seems like, if that's the case, if he's not going to clear, then he's just going to get hung wide into that very sharp turn that comes up pretty quick in these 5 furlong turf sprints. And that's tough, because he's a horse that has done all of his best running over these straight courses in Europe. I was reading the preview by our colleague, Marcus Hirsch, who I respect immensely when it comes to assessing these European runners. And he was saying something interesting about how this horse's action, which admittedly is not exactly beautiful, may be better suited to those straight courses than actually negotiating a tight turn. And I can kind of see that watching some of his races with that in mind. So I'm a little bit negative on him from that standpoint. But look, if the price drifts up enough, I mean, you could make the case that he's too talented to dismiss in this race. If he is 6-1 or higher in here, he just wasn't for me, but I get where you're going.
And I am glad you pointed out Marcus and the work that he does, because through the years, Marcus has been someone that has helped me so much, just getting familiar with a lot of these international runners, with the race recaps and the write-ups and everything that he's doing, keeping an eye on these horses through the year, and then when they come to the Breeders' Cup. So if you are someone who focuses a lot on American racing, you don't know a lot of these horses internationally, and maybe you want a little bit of help, check out some of the write-ups that Marcus Hirsch has. They are fantastic. Just like David was pointing out, he'll give you some additional information that you will not see in the past performances. And that was one thing that I was always taught early on when you're talking about racing. Try to have something that maybe not everybody can see in the PPs when you're out there, when you're talking about horses. And that's one thing that Marcus really, really does. So glad you pointed that out, David. Anything else you want to mention in the turf sprint before we move along?
No, I really have nothing to add with regard to how I would play this pick 4 sequence. I'm all about Cogburn. I mean, if someone's looking to play other types of wagers in here, I think there are horses to use underneath, like the number 1 Believing or Star of Mystery, but that's not the point of putting together this pick 4 play. So I think we can move on to the next leg, which is the Breeders' Cup Turf, race 7.
Race 7, 1.5 miles on the turf course. And in this one, we have the 2022 Breeders' Cup Turf winner, Rebels Romance, who comes into this race off of a Group 1 win in Germany, very similar to how he did when he won the 2020 Breeders' Cup, 22 Breeders' Cup Turf. But he went off form for a little while following that 2022 Breeders' Cup Turf. In fact, he came to the U.S. in 2023 in 2 races, was heavily favored in the Bowling Green and in the Turf Classic, and just did not fire. One of those races, he clipped his heels. He lost the rider. Did not fire. in the Turf Classic behind a really, really slow pace. Needed a little time and kind of a drop in class to wake back up, but he seems like he's kind of back to where he was before, David. And from a 1.5 mile distance standpoint, I think that was the key when I was looking at this race. How many of these horses are real, true 1.5 miles or have proven it at a 1.5 miles? And he's certainly done that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, as the former Breeders' Cup Turf winner, a horse that has won 1.5 miles is all one. I mean, he is a horse that I think has really validated that Breeders' Cup Turf win from 2022 that admittedly did not come against the toughest Breeders' Cup Turf field that we've ever seen. And I know some handicappers are probably still holding that in their heads to try to downgrade this horse. I think he's proven his quality over time. As you noted, the 2023 season did not go according to plan, but I mean, his campaign this year has been a strong one. And I would argue that the best race that he ran all year might have been his defeat in the King George VI at Ascot in the summer, because you watch the way that race unfolded. And it seemed like there were a couple of Aidan O'Brien horses in there, one of them being Luxembourg, whose task was to sort of set up the table for Auguste Rodin, who kind of started his decline in that race. It didn't really show up. But Rebels Romance sort of got sucked into that flow, into a stalking position. I think struck the front earlier than was really ideal for him. And the race ultimately went to horses that closed from towards the back of the pack, among which were Goliath, who was not eligible to run in the Arc because he's a gelding, but might be the most talented horse in Europe, and Blue Stocking, who won the Arc. So, I mean, Rebels Romance ran exceptionally well in that race. And, I mean, his win in Germany last time was somewhat lackluster, and maybe that's a sign he's tailing off a little bit. Charlie Appleby has not been quite as potent this year as he has been in priors with American runners, but this horse is one that was campaigned in Europe all year and is just coming over here. So this Breeders' Cup Turf, it's one where I found myself changing my opinion as I kept handicapping more than any other race, I think, on the Breeders' Cup 2-day card. And I initially was all against this horse, kind of having a prior opinion of him. The more I looked, the more I felt like I couldn't totally leave him out. But I still don't think he's going to offer the greatest value.
No, and I think the horse who may offer a little bit of value in here, David, is one that was troubled third last year in the Breeders' Cup Turf. That was the 3 Shahryar, who I got the chance to see Shahryar last year in the mornings out at Santa Anita in the days leading up to the Breeders' Cup. I'm not a clocker and I'm not a workout specialist, but this horse like really stood out to me on the track. Just when you watch him, even now, and Lucia has some videos of him over the last couple mornings, he looks so classy out on the track. Like he just carries himself like he is a royally, regally talented horse. And he's capable of big, big efforts on his best day. So he's the one in the race that we're watching. He was 25-1 in the Breeders' Cup Turf last year. And there's a moment when DeMuro has to make a decision to either stay inside or kind of move to the outside. And it's the same type of decisions that so many jockeys have to make every race, every single day. And unfortunately, the one that he made just ended up being the wrong one. And he moved, a hole opened up. And I really think he could have won if he might have just stayed in that spot.
Yeah, I believe I picked this horse last year, or picked him second. I definitely
had him on top, and I had him to win. Yep.
Yeah, so this was frustrating to watch, and you can see it happening right here. Auguste Rodin was kind of being towed into the race along the rail by Shahryar. DeMuro, I think, was afraid of getting completely caught in traffic on the inside, decided midway around the far turn to angle into the 2-3 path and just found traffic there. And it basically vacated the rail for a daring move by Ryan Moore to come on through with Auguste Rodin. But I think the most impressive part about this race is Shahryar, after losing that momentum, was coming back at the end to almost catch up to the mark for second. That was a strong Breeders' Cup Turf, and he ran really well. And he's a horse who had shown quality previous to that. I mean, he is the Japanese Derby winner from a couple of years ago. He ran well in the Japan Cup 2 years ago now. Ran well in the Dubai Shima Classic behind Rebels Romance earlier this year. I think got in a prep over the summer, nothing more than that in Japan. And he's drawn very well once again for this second attempt at the Breeders' Cup Turf. The problem is he's not going to be 25-1 like he was last year, but he's not going to be the favorite in this race, or probably not even in the top 2 or 3 choices. And I think he's a major player once again.
Yeah, another horse too who's just proven at 1.5 miles. His most recent race was 1.25 miles. He's just better going a little bit longer. He's super classy. I thought he was one of the value plays in this race.
Yeah, and while we're talking about him, I want to highlight the other Japanese horse who I think is going to fly more under the radar than Shahryar and a lot of the Japanese contenders across these 2 days. The number 1, Rushem Park. At first glance, he looks like he's just not as classy as Shahryar. He definitely took a little longer to come to hand. He wasn't quite ready for those Group 1 races as a 3-year-old, but he did plenty of winning early in his career. I mean, he won 6 of his first 10 starts, all the way up to winning that Group 2 Sankei Show in September of 23, where he was very impressive, beating title holder, a name some might recognize. He was a multiple Group 1 winner in Japan, maybe tailing off a little bit by that point, but still a very strong effort from Rushem Park to beat him. And after that, Gino, I can make excuses for each of his 4 losses. The Hong Kong Cup, he was just always wide, no cover, out of position at the back of the pack, just not the kind of trip he needed to be successful in a race that was more dominated forward. His race in the Osaka High, if you can find a replay of it, I think you can find one on YouTube if that JRA website is a little too complicated to navigate.
But you helped us navigate it. You gave us the instructions on how to get through it.
I tried my hardest. I had my friend Andy Sterling call me and like yelling at me that I put something out there that was too difficult for people to figure out. I think most people did, Andy. Sorry to mention that.
I got it just from your instructions. So
But his Osaka High, he was back in 13th in a 16-horse field onto the backstretch, and he made this crazy premature move going from 13th all the way up to 2nd on the backstretch, and then proceeded to race 4 wide around the far turn, maintaining that position, and came on to still almost win at the end. I mean, he ran by far the best race in that Group 1, maybe not the strongest Group 1 they run in Japan, but still beating or running well against a solid field. Again, extremely ride over a very boggy turf course in the Takarazuka Kinen. And then last time out, I know it looks like he really tailed off in a Group 2. When you watch that race, that was a merry-go-round affair. Slow pace. They sprinted home. He had never had any chance to make up ground. Basically, everyone stayed in place through the stretch of that race. It looked like they were just riding him to get a prep in. I think he's primed for a better effort here, and I think an American firm turf 1.5 miles is going to be just fine for him. Breaking from the inside, he gets the top Japanese rider in Christophe Lemaire on board. I would not discount this horse at a big price.
And it kind of sounds like when we're talking about it, we respect Rebels Romance, and I did what you did, where I was looking for a couple others, but then I end up coming back to him because I don't think it's the deepest race in the world. I think that it's probably not the strongest, deepest race, but there are a few horses who are kind of falling through the cracks. This is one of them. I think Shahryar was another who we mentioned. Are there any other price horses or any others that you want to talk about in here?
Yeah, I was kind of going back and forth between which other euro I wanted to use. I was initially leaning Luxembourg. I ended up really upgrading JRB when I decided to finalize my picks for this race. He's a horse that I'm kind of on the fence about because he hasn't run well enough to win this just yet. But he does feel like a horse that's been pointed for this race, unlike some others, such as Luxembourg or another Euro, Emily Upjohn, who maybe this is a little bit of an afterthought. They didn't quite pan out over the year, and finally looking to end their season on a brighter note with a softer Group 1 that they find at the end of the year in Europe in this Breeders' Cup turf. But JRB seems like a horse that has been kind of preparing for this race for a while, for a trainer, Brian Meehan, who knows how to target American races. Actually, the same trainer and same owner won this race with Dangerous Midge back in 2010 in a big upset in the Breeders' Cup turf. And this horse, I think, has a profile of one that can have success in America. He runs well over firm ground. He hasn't gotten 1.5 miles yet, but he's handled an undulating 1.25 miles over in Europe. Typically, that translates pretty well to a flat 1.5 miles, especially at a place like Del Mar. His dam wanted to go 1.5 miles, so I'm not too concerned about the distance with him. And he's got a forward style with a good post that should ensure he works out a good trip in here. I think he's one that could drift up a little bit from that 4-1. I would need him to really get interested in him in this race. But the more I looked and the more I kind of talked to some people who were friends of him, who were friends of mine that really like him, I kind of got convinced convinced and ended up upgrading him more than I thought I would when I first handicapped this race.
Yeah, I have no problem in here with him. He's lightly raced. He has upside. We have the distance questions, but he's stepping forward, and I don't think he'll have any problem getting the distance. He kept top-notch company here. Starts back in particular, that race behind Economics. So J-Ray B, we talked about the one who's a big price, Roshan Park. We talked about Shahryar. We hit on Rebels, Romance. Luxembourg was kind of a wild card horse too, who has some big races, but hasn't been in the best recent form. And I think you pointed out maybe a horse that they've used in certain situations as a horse to kind of get forward and maybe be kind of a pace setter for others. Any other thoughts on the turf before we move to the fillies and mares?
Yeah, those were kind of all the horses for me. I know you had maybe a little interest in Emily
on the
Upjohn.
two. Yeah.
Yeah.
And mainly, again, because of, like you said, this was a plan. This is something that they've been pointing to for a while. And she's a 1.5 mile horse. She's going to be able to save ground down on the inside. She's going to be able to get every trip, and she'll have every opportunity. When you look at the horses that have defeated her, Blue Stocking a couple times, and Opera Singer, Content, who was I'm laughing. I was like, I think I'm a content creator, and I always say that instead of content. So I always want to go that way. But she has faced really nice horses, and I'm just looking at some of these horses who are the true 1.5 milers. Those are some of the horses I wanted in the exotics in here. So I'm going to throw her in the pick 4.
Yeah, I would have liked her a lot more in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. I kind of wonder why they went here instead. Maybe it's a good sign. I thought I was going to like her more than I did until I watched some of her replays. It seems like she's lacked a turn of foot in her recent races. She gets there and just doesn't finish. And I was wondering if maybe that's a sign she's tailing off a little bit, but I don't disagree. I mean, she's got races in her past that would make her awfully tough for this field.
Race number 9 is the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. And the difference between the turf and the filly and mare turf is a little bit shorter. The turf, they'll go 1.5 miles. Filly and mare turf, they'll go 1 3/8 miles. And we've seen the morning line favorite in the filly and mare turf in both Breeders' Cup races in prior years. Warlike Goddess was 3rd back in 2021 and was 7th and 3rd in the Breeders' Cup turf. So we've seen run well in both the filly and mare turf and the turf. With her, it always comes down to pace shape, because we know what we're going to get with her. She's a horse that just is not all that fast early. She can't really work out her own trip, but she's super talented. It would be really cool to see her as a 7-year-old get a big win like this. And honestly, when you go through the rest of this field, she certainly is one of the, if not like the most accomplished, or has some of the better races and one of the higher ceilings in here. I can understand why she's one of the shorter prices in this field. I don't know how short, but she certainly is one of the horses to start the talking with.
Yeah, I think if she gets the right trip and ride, she is the most likely winner of this race. I mean, she's just kept better company than a lot of these horses. She's held her form for so long. I mean, maybe she's tailed off a little bit at age 7, but I don't think she's tailed off that much. I mean, she has not been in all the right spots this year with the way the turf course came up in the Flower Bowl and just got too far behind a slow pace. And I thought she even ran deceptively well in that New York, going a distance that's too short for her against a solid field over the summer. So I think that she's coming into this race in good form. The difficulty with her is just timing the move right at a place like Del Mar. And I don't want to harp too much on the last time that she ran the Breeders' Cup at Del Mar, which seems crazy to say that in this day and age, but 3 years ago when Julia Leperoux was riding her. But it did kind of feel like he moved a tad too soon that day. And I get why. I mean, you could see in her PPs and her lifetime PPs, there's this string of races where it's kind of an oddity for a deep closer. She was not only leading at the finish, but also leading at the stretch call. I mean, they could make this early move and she'd be able to sustain it against some softer competition. Couldn't hold off a late surge from Love's Only You, who made the last move that day. And I think since they made that mistake with her, they've been trying to time the move better. Sometimes she's run out of ground in her races, is closing too late. But when you got a deep closer like this, it can be a little more difficult, and especially in a large field like this, at a place like Del Mar with the short stretch. I think it's incumbent upon Junior to not be as passive as he was maybe in last year's Breeders' Cup Turf, where she was absolutely flying across the wire and seemingly finished that race with more left in the tank that she could have given and kind of didn't have the opportunity to. I think he's got to make almost an early move, as early a move as Julien did back in 2021, and just hope that there's no Love's Only You in the race this year.
In this particular race, it doesn't seem like there's that much early speed in here.
No.
With the 2 full count Felicia, we've seen her be really impressive recently. The EP Taylor on paper, and it was kind of being billed as a 2-horse race between Moira and Fev Rover, and she didn't want any of that business. She just ran them right off their feet that day at just under 8-1. And honestly, there were times where in races like this, you'll have some European runners or maybe horses where you think they will have intent. And so you're not sure if the pace projector will match. I trust the pace projector, I think 100% in this situation. I think the 2 is by far the fastest. I think Didia is a horse who I don't know what to do with, and I'm not sure if she's good enough to win a race like this, but she certainly should have every opportunity to hit the board and get a really soft trip up front or kind of sit in second. And if full count Felicia comes back to the field. So I'm going to kind of play the race this way, David, and looking for horses that can be more forward or can be just sitting a little closer than some of the deep closers.
Yeah, the pace projector is kind of built to not depict a horse on a 10-length lead early because we so rarely see that in American racing, especially in turf racing. Even if a horse has a huge pace figure advantage, the jockey typically rates to go only as fast as they need to set the pace. But full count Felicia is kind of that rare horse where she's almost better served if the jockey opens up a little bit early, as they did last time in that EP Taylor. So I don't think she's going to be going too fast if she's able to kind of keep a lid on her early aggression, and she can be a horse that gets pretty aggressive early. I think you can see that in her morning training coming into this race. You don't typically see a horse that's entered a turf marathon drilling a 57.5 for their final drill coming into a race, but that's just the kind of horse full count Felicia is. The speed comes naturally to her, but she's also got that staying power where she can keep going. And I don't know about you, Gino. When I first came to handicap this race, I was kind of expecting to come out of watching or rewatching this EP Taylor replay, liking Moira more than I did full count Felicia. But watching this back again, I mean, full count Felicia is just setting this pace so easily. And it's very deceptive because it seems like the other jockeys just fell asleep when you're watching it visually and allowed her to open up this 15-length lead. But then you look at the Timeform US pace figures, they're all color-coded in red, kind of off the charts high 150s. I mean, she was setting a legit pace. And even when they get into the stretch, which I'll fast forward to, I mean, it's not like Moira is quickly cutting into the margin and full count Felicia is falling apart. She is maintaining her stride through the finish. I mean, she is showing no signs of stopping in this race, arguably showing even more stamina than Moira did in winning this race. So I think she's legit. She's taken a step forward since coming into the Kevin Attard barn. Maybe she's always wanted to go this far because she's got plenty of stamina on the bottom side. When you look at some of her full siblings, also by Warfront, they also wanted to go longer distances, 1.25 miles and beyond. And I think she fits this race really well. And like you said, Irad Ortiz going to be in the driver's seat, lone speed. I think it'd be wise of him to try to open up 4 lengths on this field early and try to make somebody come out of their best running style to come after him.
David, I think you thought a couple of the horses down towards the inside also were live, right? With Beautiful Love and Cinderella's Dream, the Appleby runners.
No, I'm actually against both of them.
Really? Okay. Maybe I was reading our things wrong. So talk to us about who are the horses you like in here. Who are we going to use in our pick 4?
Yeah, I think we're actually on very similar pages here, Gino. I put full count Felicia on top, and I actually put Moira second. I think that she's a horse that has to prove that she can handle 1 3/8. I'm not 100% convinced about it, but I mean, she's gone 1.25 miles effectively enough times that it shouldn't be that outside of her wheelhouse. And I do think that she got a little too far back in that EP Taylor, and she ran fine in that race. I like her more on some of her prior form, particularly that Diana, where she arguably ran better than anybody against a really good field of fillies, plenty from the Chad Brown stable, who are not in here, but would have had the talent to run if they had carved this at a shorter distance. And I think Moira is among the most talented horses in this race. It's just a matter of whether or not she can work out a trip from I think it's now post 9 after the scratch of Ylang-Ylang, but she's got Flavian Pratt on board. Kevin Attard has certainly gotten 2 of the best riders in the game for both of his horses in here, and I can easily foresee them getting good trips, and they're the 2 that I want. Like I said, I respect Warlike Goddess, and then kind of the horse that I was on the fence about was let's call her Content. She's kind of the €1 left in this race that makes sense. But I'm on the fence about her. How are you feeling about content?
Yeah, she's a 1.5 mile horse. Like, she's a true distance horse. Maybe you can look at some of the turf horses she's been on, and maybe you can make excuses for some of the particular conditions, the soft going. But the hard part is you look back earlier on in her career, and she was fine with soft going. So I was kind of hemming and hawing a bit back and forth with her. But I do feel like of the European runners, she was the one I wanted. And it was funny. The analysis that you shared about the EP Taylor was spot on in that I like Moira more than most of this field. I felt like when I was watching that race back, I was going to come out of it saying, okay, I'm going to bet Moira in this race. And it actually was the opposite. I was more impressed with Full Count Felicia and the opportunity she might have to wire this field. So, yeah, I respect Moira. I think I ended up picking her third or fourth overall. And I put her right there next to Warlike Goddess, who I think will come closing. I kind of felt like those, like Warlike Goddess and Moira, are kind of like measuring sticks for this race. I feel like they'll probably run pretty well. Moira was third in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf last year. And honestly, one of her more impressive races ever was actually a couple years ago when I think in just her second turf start, she was fifth in a pretty tough Filly and Mare Turf. So she certainly can level up in the big races. I think I went 2, 7, 4, 10. Those are sort of the combinations of horses I'm going to be using in exotics.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap up my thoughts on content, she's a horse that, as you said, gets the 1.5 miles, and she really seemed to blossom going that distance this summer. The last two races, easy to make trip excuses because she was behind slow paces. Maybe the soft ground didn't work for her as well. My problem with her in this race is when you watch those last couple of races and some of her others, she's a horse that travels very strongly and can get a little too keen on her jockey sometimes. And I wonder if there's not a lot of pacing here, especially if Full Count Felicia doesn't go as fast as last time, if maybe there's going to be a lot of snatching and grabbing in behind, and she's a horse that doesn't break that quickly and just ends up a little further back than she really needs to be to have success in here. So that's my concern with her. But look, she's got a race on her card in the Yorkshire Oaks that could certainly win here.
Well, let's see if we can get Full Count Felicia to wire this field in the Filly and Mare Turf, and we'll move to finish it up in the Breeders' Cup Mile, I believe, which is race number 11. So that'll be the fourth of the 4 races we're talking about in the Saturday All Breeders' Cup Turf Pick 4. So the Breeders' Cup Mile, I think you kind of look to the middle of the field as horses who are going to take a lot of money in here. David with Notable Speech, Porta Fortuna. I think both of them, I respect the heck out of what they've done. But I actually prefer a horse that was defeated by Porta Fortuna a couple times. Ramatuel, who we were showing from the inside. And just watching those races back, I feel like she was going to get a better trip in here than some of those others who want to be more forwardly placed. She can, Ramatuel, show some tactical speed, but I think she wants to sit a little bit more, whereas horses like Porta Fortuna are just faster. And in this field, I'm concerned about Porta Fortuna getting the type of trip that she has, because you throw a horse like Goliad into a race like this, and a lot of these horses who are used to soft front-end trips probably aren't getting those soft front-end trips in here.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at Ramatuel's lifetime past performances because she showed a lot of talent as a 2-year-old sprinting, ran especially well in that Prix behind Van Dijk, who I don't think went on after that, but looked like the best 2-year-old in Europe last year. And she led until the very late stages before getting pipped by him at the wire. Facing males exclusively last year. And they targeted some of the top races for fillies this year. And watching back the English 1000 Guineas, I thought that she ran the best race of anybody. You mentioned comparing her to Porta Fortuna. I thought that Ramatuel had the tougher trip in the 1000 Guineas because she came off cover earlier, was up close to the pace, made the first move to take over in a race that was coming apart at the end, where it seemed like you wanted to make the last move, as the winner ultimately did. And Porta Fortuna just got by her at the wire, but I thought Ramatuel did much more of the heavy lifting in that race. And I think the connections kind of overreacted next time by taking her further back in the coronation, actually putting her behind Porta Fortuna early, and she could never quite catch up to that foe. But last time out in that Prix de la Forêt, which has produced Breeders' Cup Mile winners in the past multiple times, I thought she ran exceptionally well. I mean, she clearly relished the soft going, but based on her prior form, I don't think she's some horse that needs soft ground. But I love the turn of foot that she displayed. I think the 7 furlongs over there translates very well to the mile, especially at a place like Del Mar in the United States. And she's I mean, I know some people are like upset about the rail draw for her. I don't see that being a negative at all. No. The jockey can get her covered up the way that they like to ride in France. I mean, they can put her right in behind the speed, maybe in the second or third flight. And she could just save all the ground and use her turn of foot to come through. I think we both like her in this race. And if she's around 5-1, I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, I'm going to play her to win too if she is in that range. I was kind of going through the rest of the field. As I said, like, I respect Notable Speech. I respect Porta Fortuna. Johannes is one I think that we should talk about because he has been extremely impressive out here on the West Coast. And he's doing it impressively, easily, fast speed figures. He's pretty versatile. How do you feel about Johannes?
I've been a big fan of his all through the year. I know he's a West Coast based runner, but I just have an affinity for this horse. I mean, he was so impressive in his first few turf starts. I remember highlighting those on the podcast I previously did with Craig, and just kind of always looking forward to his next start, and was kind of bummed when he didn't get the right trip in the American turf when they finally tried Tougher Company last year. And he's delivered as the dominant turf horse out in California this year. My problem is comparing him to this group, not only the East Coast horses, but also the group of Europeans, but maybe they're not all stars, but I think the level that they bring is fairly high. And I kind of look through the fields that Johannes has beaten, and I was just kind of hoping to see a little more quality in there. I mean, the best horse that he's ever faced might be Fantastic again. That was second to him in the Yeah.
So how many horses in here are better than any horse he's ever faced, right? He's probably facing 7 or 8 horses better than any one he's ever faced.
100%. And that's ultimately the major knock that I had against him. And I think kind of being the local horse in California, he's going to take some money. And I would probably just need a bigger price on him that he's going to be to overcome that uncertainty that I have about his class heading into this race. And also, I mean, he didn't draw the best post position. I mean, I know he overcame a wider trip around the second turn last time. I don't think he can afford to do that in a tougher race like this. So no. I ended up going in other directions.
Yeah, I had him more of an underneath type horse. One that has been a fun topic as far as odds are concerned was the number 8, who is a horse who I think is 20-1 on the morning line, was only beaten 2 lengths in the Breeders' Cup Mile last year behind Master of the Seas. And this year, More Than Looks is now going to make his 3rd start off of the bench. Could be trending in the right direction and heading for maybe a career best effort. Just a horse that doesn't have a whole lot of early speed, will sit back, make one late run. I mean, it would not be shocking to me to see this be a weekend where Cherie DeVaux really kind of stamps herself and wins a couple of Breeders' Cup races. She has that type of quality, and she's that good of a trainer.
Yeah, I said to somebody right after the turf mile at Keeneland, well, More Than Looks is going to be everyone's wise guy horse in the Breeders' Cup Mile because, I mean, he just has that look to him. 3rd off the layoff, didn't want to run the 4-star Dave. They had to run there because a previous race that he was in got canceled at Saratoga, so it wasn't totally ready. Delivered a better effort in the turf mile, but that was a race that just didn't set up for him at all. I could show the stretch replay of that. The pace was pretty slow. Carl Spackler just got to control on the front end, and More Than Looks just puts in that reliable late run. I mean, he really comes flying through the stretch. I mean, for a while, it doesn't even look like he's going to get up to hit the board, and he kind of kicks it into overdrive in the final 8 every time. Here gets up for second. He's just a horse that is going to be finishing with a flourish. The big question with More Than Looks is, how is he going to work out a better trip in this race than he did last year, where he, again, was flying across the wire, but had to go way too wide on the second turn, losing momentum at that point to get there at the end? Because he is a horse that is probably going to be last early, maybe vying for last with Chili Flag. And Jose Ortiz has to find a way to not only save ground, but get this horse in position to make that run over the short stretch at Del Mar. So I don't totally trust them to get the trip. but I do think he's among the most talented horses in this race, and I respect him. As you noted, he's not going to be 20-1. Everybody thinks he's the interesting long shot in here. He's going to be probably around 8-1, maybe a tick shorter than that. But that's probably not a bad price on a horse that's got his resume.
And that's one of those things where, like, if he was just 10-1, he probably could be closer to 10-1. But since he's 20, you're gonna get the overreaction from everyone that go, "Oh my gosh!"
Believe me, I know.
Right?
It.
Yeah, you know that one. So, more than looks, one that they will have to hold off in here. Any others that we didn't talk about or you want to mention in the mile?
One other horse that I'm very interested in that I toyed with putting on top is the number 4, Diego Velasquez.
Yes.
A horse that actually was entered over the summer at Saratoga in the Saratoga Derby by Aidan O'Brien. And kind of interesting. I mean, that race obviously I think got canceled or came off the turf. I forget. I mean, there was some weather impediment to that race being run. I think when it's originally scheduled, they recarded it. He wasn't entered back. And they kind of gave him some time after that and showed up in maybe an unlikely spot going all the way back to a mile in that Solano Way Stakes at Leopardstown, but I thought was pretty impressive. And that's a race that when you look through the field, horses have come back out of that race to really validate the form. I mean, Mountain Bear, who was third, he was in that turf mile at Keeneland that Carl Spackler won and was third in there as well with a little bit of traffic. So Diego Velasquez, I think, formed his stacks up very well against this field. And as you were noting, Goliad's going to be in front. I mean, no one's going to try to go with him early. He'll set his own pace, and he's good enough or he's not. I think he's probably not good enough. But beyond him, there's not a ton of speed in this race. And Diego Velasquez has that tactical speed. We'll see how it translates to an American surface going the flat mile. But I suspect that Ryan Moore is going to try to have him somewhere in that second flight. And maybe he doesn't have the turn of foot or the finishing speed of some others, but he feels like a horse that is really on the upswing coming in here. And one that Aidan somewhere over the summer was like, I was wrong about this horse. He doesn't want to go a mile and a half. He's a Breeders' Cup Mile horse, and they kind of refocused and shifted their attention towards this race. And I think he's going to run pretty well in here, and seems like one that is not getting the respect that he deserves.
Even some of the best in the world are willing to make a change, call an audible when they feel like, yeah, you know what I initially thought wasn't going well. Let's cut this horse back a bit. And that was a positive for Diego Velasquez in the last couple. Should we get to the moment of truth, the moment that everyone's been waiting for, the picks, and a look at how we may put together a pick 4 ticket? I would have no problem with people that wanted a single Cogburn too. Like, especially if you're someone who's playing with a budget, you're playing a lot of races. We throw in the horse that I liked a little bit from the outside, just because we're doing a team ticket here, and David's so kind with me, so he wasn't gonna say I'm giving you my single and that's it. We put the horse who I liked a little bit there as well, but I understand and I respect the heck out of Cogburn. And for me, he's not a horse I'm trying to beat, just maybe a horse that I would include maybe 1 or 2 others in certain spots. But the 7th race, David, is where we will spread out a little bit in the turf and use a couple.
Yeah, I'm never going to argue with anybody who doesn't want to just single a heavy favorite that's going to be everyone's single. So I applaud you for at least having some kind of alternative opinion in that race. In the turf, I think it is the one that I feel is most wide open. There are prices that I would very much want to see win here to get alive later in the sequence, like Rusham Park, who I like quite a bit, or Shahryar, who we both like. We'll see what price JRB is going to be. You mentioned using City of Troy defensively. That's kind of the way that I feel about Rebels Romance.
Sure.
I'm not so positive on him from getting the value that I would need, but I do think in a lot of ways he is among the most likely winners of this race, if not outright the most likely winner. So I don't want to leave him out completely. If I was structuring this as like a Steve Chris style ABC ticket, as I often do, I usually try to upgrade the horses in that kind of wager to A's that I think are going to offer the best value. So I would probably downgrade Rebels Romance a little bit in that sort of wager, but doing a caveman style ticket, I want to put him somewhere.
In the 9th race, which is the filly and mare turf, we talked quite a bit about the EP Taylor and the 2 horses coming out of that, which were Full Count Felicia, the 2, and Moira, the 10. So both of them made their way onto the tickets. Warlike Goddess, we both respect as the horse to beat in here, and one that will come running. And I like the 7 a little bit more than you did with Content, just kind of getting back to some of the races that he had big efforts earlier on. Can he, get back to some of the glory days? 2, 4, 7, and 10 for us in race number 9. And we just went over the Breeders' Cup Mile. If you want to add anything to the analysis of the 9th, and take us through the closeout leg.
Yeah, I think the mile, to close it out, that's the place in the sequence that I think we're taking a bit more of a stand, because we're against a couple of shorter prices. You mentioned, you said that you like Johannes a little bit, but we're leaving him out of this kind of wage, just looking for horses that I think are going to offer a little more value in this sequence, because we did use some favorites earlier on. We both agree on Ramatuel. I think she's a horse that's going to be a fair price in this race, and I believe we both picked her on top. We like her quite a bit. You have plenty of interest in More Than Looks, as do I. I think he's going to offer some value in this race. And Diego Velasquez is my Euro that can fly a little bit under the radar here. Another one that I think that 8-1 morning line is probably going to hold up on him. So that's how we're looking to close things out in the mile.
And however you play Breeders' Cup races, I think a lot of people do this type of thing with some of their friends, right? It's nice when you have especially on big days like Friday and Saturday, where there's so many wagers. We just talked about 2. We didn't even talk about any of the pick 5s, right? Or like the early pick, the Breeders' Cup pick 5 on Friday, the other pick 5s, the pick 6s, the multi-day wagers. You have to have a big bankroll. I know a lot of people play with their friends, and when you do that, sometimes you're making compromises, or you're saying, okay, where are the races that we really like? Let's kind of focus in on them. And we will use some favorites in some of the first few. But then, like you said, you have to pick 1 or 2 of the races where you're going to take a stand and you're going to try to zig a little bit when others zag. And I think if we hit this ticket, even if it were to play out pretty chalky, we'd still get an okay return on our investment, because even though if we hit it and we have a winner of the 11th race, it's not going to be, I think, a short, overwhelming price favorite in there. So I like the way we've structured that ticket, where your opinions, I think you have your top 1 or top 2 in basically each of these races. And I do too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the Breeders' Cup, as you were alluding to, is a great opportunity to sort of take in some other opinions that might not have come to you organically just in your own handicapping, because these races are so complicated. You're not going to see everything there is to see yourself. And hearing somebody looks at a race a little differently, or has an opinion that might be contrary to yours, just makes you think about the race in a slightly different way. And hopefully we helped you do that a little bit. I know there's a lot of content out there being created about the Breeders' Cup, and if you took the time to listen to us, hopefully it helped you get some alternative ideas about how to view some of these races.
We'll overload information in the next couple days. Take it all in, be a sponge, absorb it all. One thing I try to do is just what you're saying. I don't necessarily completely change opinions I had on horses, but I will add others from sharp people that I trust and respect that may not have been on my radar, especially when those horses are big prices. So look around, and however you're playing these races, I hope you have a great Breeders' Cup Friday and Breeders' Cup Saturday. And David, I enjoyed talking these sequences out for you with you on big days. Anytime you want to do something like this, I'd love to do so.
Yep, this was a lot of fun. Hopefully people enjoyed it, and I'm sure we'll have some more content like this in the future.
Well, don't forget, shop.drf.com for everything you need. Those Breeders' Cup packages are now available. You can get more insight on the betting strategies from this very sharp handicapper right here, David Aragona. David, I look forward to the next time we talk some races, and I wish you the best of luck this weekend.